Did you know that radish seed pods are edible? The next time you grow radishes, instead of harvesting all of them, let a couple of them grow. As they grow and keep getting taller, they'll start to form flower heads. Then those flower heads will form flowers, and eventually those flowers will turn into seed pods. Pick them while they're still firm. If you leave them too long, they'll get pithy and won't taste as good. They can be eaten fresh, added to salads, used in a stir-fry, or even pickled. Try growing potatoes from just a potato peeling. I found this potato peeling starting to sprout in our compost pile, and I put it in a pot with some soil and kept it watered. It grew surprisingly well, and in a few months I was harvesting potatoes grown from that single potato peel. It wasn't a huge harvest, but considering we started with just a single potato peeling, I thought it did all right. If you have more peppers than you can use right away, you can freeze some of them for later. Instead of putting slices in a freezer bag and then freezing them, freeze the slices on a cookie sheet first, then put them in the freezer bag. That way you can more easily remove just what you need and put the rest back in the freezer. You can actually remove rust from old gardening tools using something that's safe enough to put in your food. In this case, I'm removing rust from these old brace drill bits. All that I'll need to remove the rust is some citric acid, some water, and a wire brush. I put some water in this plastic storage box, then I mixed about a third of this container of citric acid into the water. I put the rusty drill bits into the water with the citric acid in it, and I let them soak for about 4.5 hours. It's probably a good idea not to do this with any valuable antiques without consulting an expert first. As you can see, after about 4.5 hours, the rust is literally falling off. Although I was prepared to use Scotch-Brite, all that was needed to knock off the remaining rust was a small wire brush. A lot of the rust just fell off into the water with the citric acid in it. The final results were pretty amazing in my opinion, considering how rusty the drill bits were to begin with. Cucumbers can be grown vertically, and if you've never tried it before, it's definitely worth a try. They're easier to find, easier to harvest, and they grow a lot straighter. If planted in a hill, cucumbers can sprawl 6 feet in all directions and take up 30 to 40 square feet of space in your garden. Grown on a trellis, they only take up 5 or 6 square feet. You can grow a lot of cucumbers in a much smaller amount of space. When transplanting tomato, pepper, and other seedlings into the garden, I like to start with some fresh compost in a bucket. Then I dig the planting hole and mix that soil with the compost. After I mix the soil and the compost together, then I add it back into the planting hole. Then I put the seedling into the planting hole and fill in around it with the soil and compost mixture. I feel like it gets my plants off to a better start. If you're new to gardening, it might kind of freak you out if you see this many caterpillars on your fennel, dill, or parsley. Instead of getting out the insecticide and killing all of these caterpillars, I like to coexist with them when I can. One way I do that is to hand pick them from my fennel, dill, or parsley and relocate them to a row of carrots. If you happen to have a carrot that is beginning to flower like this one, it can support up to about a half a dozen caterpillars. And once they're this size, it only takes them a few days to reach the chrysalis stage when they stop eating. When transferring the caterpillars to the carrot tops, I gently place them on the foliage and spread them out instead of putting them all in one place. If you have room, you can even grow an extra fennel plant just for the caterpillars. This is what those caterpillars look like when they turn into a butterfly. If you're feeling adventurous, you can take a few indoors and feed them until they shed their skins and turn into a chrysalis. After the chrysalis stage, they shed their skin again and become a butterfly. Then they can be released. It can be an educational experience if you have children or grandchildren. I've done individual videos about most of the tips in this video, so if you're interested in more details, I'll put links to those videos in the description. When you're growing eggplants and you see a brown spot on one of the leaves, stop and take a closer look. The brown spot on top of the leaf is caused by what's going on the bottom side of the leaf. Once you turn the leaf over, the problem becomes very apparent. Since they're all congregated in one spot, these lace bugs can be easily taken care of by spraying them with soapy water or dipping them in soapy water. Or you can spray them with your insecticide of choice. Sometimes you can catch the problem early before it becomes much worse. Here we have an adult lace bug and dozens of baby lace bugs. Something as simple as a kitchen strainer is very useful when saving vegetable seeds and flower seeds. For vegetables and flowers with very small seeds, you simply rub the seed heads inside the kitchen strainer and the seeds fall through onto a paper plate. The seeds fall through and most of the chaff stays inside the strainer. Here I'm saving basil seeds. Like I mentioned, it's also very useful for saving many flower seeds. These are celosia seeds that I'm saving here. It works exactly the same way. If your Oxalis triangularis or purple shamrock looks like this, it's probably not getting enough light. If it continues to not get enough light, it could end up looking like this. If that happens, don't throw it out yet. It might just be dormant. When a purple shamrock goes dormant, the top part of the plant dies off, but the tuber underneath the ground is still alive and ready to grow. When the plant goes dormant, it's a perfect time to repot it. Just go through the old soil and pick out all of the tubers and put them aside. Plant those tubers about an inch deep in new soil and begin watering again. I usually wait till late April or early May to do that because we keep ours outside. Once we begin watering again, in no time it looks something like this. It's a beautiful plant that we've had for years. We let it go dormant every year now. Squash vine borers can be a nightmare for people who grow zucchini and other squash. Their favorite place to lay eggs is right at the base of the stem, right at ground level. Here's what a single squash vine borer egg looks like. You can take away their favorite place to lay eggs by wrapping the stem with aluminum foil. Even though this does help, it's no foolproof solution. This is what a squash vine borer looks like. Here, several squash vine borers killed this large zucchini plant. If you have a lot of trouble with squash vine borers, you can grow resistant varieties like this green-striped cushaw. There are several moschata species that are especially resistant to the squash vine borers. A viewer gave me a tip on pulling carrots that I still use today. When you get ready to pull a carrot, push down first. If you have light, fluffy soil and it's moist, sometimes pulling carrots can be pretty easy. Then there are those times when the top of the carrot pulls off, or worse yet, the carrot breaks in the ground. Pushing first and then pulling isn't a perfect solution, but I've found that it does help, especially on those occasions when the conditions aren't perfect for harvesting carrots. With a little practice, you might end up with a beautiful harvest like these coral carrots that I grew one year. You can even try growing different colors of carrots. Carrots come in more colors than just orange. Purple Dragon is a variety that we've grown several times and we both like it pretty well. Try your best not to plant too early. Sometimes it's not our fault because it's getting close to the last frost date and the weather report suddenly changes. That's what happened here when I was scrambling to cover up summer crops like tomatoes and peppers and other sensitive things that would die if we got a freeze. I used to be in a big hurry to get things in the ground, but if you plant too early and the soil hasn't warmed up, those summer crops like tomatoes and pepper plants won't grow that much anyway. So sometimes it's just better to be patient and wait a while. If you buy a package of seeds that just says snap peas, it will grow something like this. It'll be about 6 foot tall and need lots of support. If you buy a dwarf variety of snap pea like Sugar Ann or Sugar Daddy, you can grow them in containers with minimal support like these bamboo stakes that I'm putting in. By growing them in containers, they are portable and you can put them anywhere in your yard that you like. And they're also very easy to harvest. You can even pull up a chair and harvest them if you want. Many times I'll pick a few and eat them right out in the garden. A lot of people don't know it, but you can grow your own ginger. I've grown it in the ground like you see here, but I've also grown it in containers. And as you can see, it's very easy to harvest. This is what freshly harvested ginger looks like. It looks different than what you buy in the store. Growing ginger in a container is very easy to do also, and very easy to harvest. Ginger growing in your garden can be a great conversation starter. Most people in the U.S. have never seen ginger growing. If you grow some ginger and have more than you can use, you can freeze ginger for later. It might sound weird, but you can easily peel ginger using a spoon. Once your ginger is peeled, grate it, making sure to use the safety attachment that comes with your grater. Put small chunks of the grated ginger on a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper. Place the cookie sheet with the grated ginger inside your freezer. If you don't want to grate the ginger, you can also freeze whole pieces. Once the grated ginger and the whole pieces of ginger are frozen, you can put them in freezer bags to be used later. Intercropping your spring and summer crops is a great way to maximize your gardening space. Planted along this drip irrigation line, I have some eggplants, and on either side of them I have a row of lettuce growing. If you'll notice, I have my summer crops planted on my drip irrigation lines and my early spring crops planted between them. Planted on my next two lines, I have some pepper plants, and between those I have a row of spinach. By the time the summer crops start growing and need more space, it'll be time to remove the early spring crops. If I could only give one tip to beginning gardeners, it would be start small. If you've never grown a garden before, it would be easy to be tempted to try to do everything I do or everything some other YouTube gardener does. Instead of doing that, I would suggest growing just one or two things that you really like to eat. The garden that you're looking at here is mine, and I know from experience that there are lots of problems that occur in my garden. There are insects, disease, weather-related problems, and other things that can happen. I've been growing things for decades, and I learn new things every single year. So instead of being overwhelmed by it all, just concentrate on a few things and learn about those. Then the next year, expand a little bit, and each year afterwards, expand a little bit more. Your experiences each year will help you grow in the following years. I got a mushroom growing kit for Christmas one year, and I was really surprised by how easy it was to use. Everything I needed was right in the kit. These were oyster mushrooms, and after we harvested our mushrooms, we ate them 3 different ways. All I had to do was cut the plastic open in an X pattern and then loosen up the spores that were already there with a fork and then soak them in water. After soaking the block for the suggested time, I took the block out, and in no time we had tiny mushrooms growing. My son also got a kit, and his did much better than mine did. As you can see, there are tons of mushrooms coming out, and this is a time lapse of them growing. It only takes a few days for them to grow from the time you first start seeing them until they're ready to harvest. If you have trouble with tomato diseases in your area, you might try grafting tomatoes. With a little practice, grafting tomatoes is easier than you might think. By grafting a great tasting heirloom onto a more vigorous, disease-resistant rootstock, you can end up with an heirloom tasting tomato that is more disease-resistant. This is what one of my grafted plants looked like in November, right before our first frost. At one time, this tomato plant had over 40 tomatoes on it. And as you can see, it looks pretty good for this late in the season. And this is what our last November harvest looked like from that plant. As I mentioned before, I've done individual videos on most of these tips, so don't forget to check those out down in the description. One thing that I think isn't talked about enough is trying to keep the fun in gardening. Do some things just for the fun of it. What you're looking at here is me harvesting 7 different types of peppers from one plant. Here's a look at the 7 types of peppers that I grew on that one plant, and I accomplished that by grafting. I grow bananas in zone 6B, and it's not because I get anything to eat from them. I think it's just fun to watch them grow. Of course, they have some ornamental value, but the main reason I started growing them was just for the fun of it. Another thing that I do just for the fun of it is breeding plants. Here I'm hand pollinating an iris so I can create a new type of iris. Here's a new iris that I created a few years ago, and the only place you can find an iris exactly like this one is in my yard. I mentioned I grew 7 different types of peppers on one plant. One time I also grew 2 different types of tomatoes on one plant, and another time 4 different types of tomatoes on one plant. Here you can see 2 very different types of tomatoes growing on the same plant. And the reason I did it was just for the fun of it. Gardening can be a lot of work, so keeping some fun in gardening I think is very important. Even if it's doing something silly, like grafting a petunia onto a tomato plant. Have a gardening tip that you'd like to share? Feel free to share it down in the comments. If this video goes over well, I might just do another video on gardening tips. We'll just have to wait and see. Don't forget to check out the full videos on these gardening tips down in the description. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.